Hi, I'm Jelle.
And I'm Feli.
And I'm really excited because what we're going to do now is we're going to use a model and actually like make use of it in like a business like context. So cool. And we're going to do that in Azure. So let's see what we already have in Azure, because there's a lot of stuff that we've created. Let's take a look at it. What do we have?
Yeah, in another talk, we already made a pipeline with the designer, and we're going to use that pipeline to explain how to deploy it. So we're going to...
Yeah, because what we did is we made a pipeline, but when you say pipeline, you mean like a training pipeline, right?
Yes, yeah.
So training pipelines are the 5 steps of machine learning that you really should know by now. Those 5 steps that we've been repeating over and over, they're actually just part of the first phase, which is the training phase, but there's a second phase, and that's the inference phase. And inference, it's a nice word. We could also say the production phase or the getting to finally use your model phase. Basically, what we're going to do is that model that we've been training and that we're really happy with and that can predict certain characteristics, we're going to use that to actually deliver input to it and get output and use that output somehow. Because the training pipeline, it's really cool for training a model, but it doesn't make sense to keep training a model each time you want some output.
Yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to go to the designer, and I'm going to use a 2-class logistic regression that looks whether someone has an income of more than 50,000 or less than 50,000. You can see we already made this pipeline and everything's completed, doesn't give any errors, and this model is also already trained.
So
and
this
that
is
a
very successful training pipeline. Hooray! But as I said, if I now deliver some input, like some data, and I want to know, well, in this case, let's say I deliver my personal data and I want to know how much money I make, because apparently I don't know that. This model could predict that, but it doesn't really make sense for me to hand that to this pipeline, because if I deliver my data to this pipeline, it'll start retraining the model. And why would I want that? I want just the predicted value. I want my output. And that's what we call an inference pipeline. And normally I'd be like, I need to create a whole new pipeline. That sounds hard. How would I do that? And luckily it's really easy, because if you've been watching the screen, it's the button has been visible all along. There's a create inference pipeline button, and that will take this training pipeline and it will change it up a bit, and then it will create an inference pipeline. Now there's 2 types of inference pipelines. If you click the drop-down button, you can see that we can create a real-time inference pipeline, which is basically you you bring in some input and it will do a prediction as an output. But in more like heavy scenarios where you'll be bombarding your model with data, it makes more sense to create like a batch inference pipeline where it will batch large clumps of data together as input before using the model, just to speed things up. Well, that's calculating in batch. It's faster. Let's say for our purposes, we're just going to use a real-time inference pipeline. We're not going to put all that much input into it, and we're happy with just resolving one piece of input at a time. Let's click the button. Let's create it.
Yeah, so in this case, we've already made an inference pipeline before, so we actually don't have the option.
Oh, that's right.
To create a new inference pipeline, so we choose to update the old one.
Yeah. We're going to update it because we have changed nothing, but we do want to show you how it works. So basically from we are clicking a different button, but you'll get the same result. And this is actually a really useful button because you can make changes based on your training pipeline and let them flow through to your inference pipeline. In this case, there's nothing to change, but it is really interesting to see how we create it. So what happens when we click the button? So you can see now it has added a few steps. We have a web service input building block that has now been added, and also a web service output building block that has been added, which makes sense because we need to have some way of connecting to our model. And it's left some of the building blocks intact, and it deleted some other building blocks. Can you maybe explain why the ones that we still have are still important, even though we're, you could say, well, why not just input, model, output? But there's still some steps there. Why are they there?
Yeah, so what happens, we still have our data set. That makes sense because we don't want to lose any of that previous data. Another thing is we still select columns in the data set. We deleted one column from this data set, but with new data that's coming in, we also expect that it will have that one column we want to delete. So that's why we still have select columns in data set. We used to have train model. That one disappeared because here we are actually using an already trained model as the input for score model.
Similarly, the split data is also gone because we're not going to split the input to use for training and scoring. We're just going to, we already have the model. So those have actually been swapped with the actual model that came out of our training pipeline.
Yes, yes. So we still have score model. Score model will now go to the web service output, which means that if you give it an input, that score will also be outputted to that web service. But evaluate model still exists so that we can still see how our model is scoring. And if you have anything after this, if you have anything that needs to be done with the evaluated model that existed in the old pipeline, that will also still exist in this real-time inference pipeline.
So that's really cool because then you could create pipelines where you have this self-feeding loop where even though your model is already in production, and your people are using it, people are typing stuff in, like their personal data. You, of course, take very good care of their data.
You have the select columns to remove that.
And then the data gets input, and the model gives out an answer, but still, the model could also still be learning. You could create such a cool loop where all the, where the model is still increasing in let's say, accuracy or something.
Yeah, and it's really nice because you also have some options to export data after evaluation, and that is just really nice to still be able to have all of those possibilities that the designer gives you. But then,
so we have this nice inference pipeline now. One thing to add is if you use all the auto options that we have been using. The target column is actually part of the input, as you saw, as you see when you make a training pipeline. Of course, you need your target column because how else are you going to train your model? Because we've made this inference pipeline based on a training pipeline, the target column is still part of the input. However, you could just leave it empty because it's not going to use that target column in the prediction. That makes sense both out of if you know the target column, in this case the income. You don't have to predict it, but also the model never used the income column, the target column, to predict that column. So the model will not have that column as part of its algorithm. You could just, input, in this case, income as one of the categories or whatever. It's not going to use it. You can work around that, or you can adjust the pipeline slightly if you're not happy with that default option.
Yeah, because this is your inference pipeline, but you can still change a bunch of things. So if you want, you can change it. We're not going to do that because you can just leave it empty and it will still work.
Yeah,
so.
And also there might be a use case where you're actually providing the target column still, even while you're using an inference pipeline. These options will help you to create that pipeline that you and your business need.
Yeah.
So you've been hovering that submit button really anxiously. So let's just submit this inference pipeline now, and we can select an existing or create a new. Let's just create new because let's pretend this is the first time that we're using this pipeline. So we'll select a name. We could do some description, but it's taken the description from our previous one, so let's use that. And as you can see, we need a compute target, which makes sense, because of course this prediction, it might not be as heavy as model training, but we do need some compute to actually perform this, to execute the model, so to say. So yes, you'll need to associate a compute target with your inference pipeline. Let's submit it. Now, it'll take a while, so even though you'll not be seeing it at the moment, I will tell you what you'll be seeing in a minute. Because what we're actually creating while it's updating and getting greener and greener is a web service point where we can connect basically whatever we want to that web service. We can basically create an API. Well, we don't even have to do it. It will be created automatically, and we can configure that API. We can set some security settings. We can adjust who gets access to it and what. But most importantly, that API allows you to make HTTP calls and send some input, and it will send you the output back, which is your expected, in this case, income, which is a really, really powerful way of using your model. You could use it as a background task for your website. You could use it as the main focus of an application, where basically all you're doing is sending in input and getting output, and that's your entire application. There's a lot of ways to be using this with such a versatile unit as a web service. And once it's actually deployed, we'll be able to see that not only has it created that service for us, it also allows us to test it from within this studio, and it will provide us with all the connection details. So while this is setting up, I think it's good to know that we've been describing all these parts, and if you stop halfway through, it's important to know where to get back to your what you were working on. So what we're now creating is an endpoint, but that's currently in progress, but we've also created a pipeline. So if you look under assets, you'll find everything back, even if you stop halfway through, which will help you to actually continue your work if for some reason you had to stop halfway.
Yeah, so here under pipelines, you can see that we have the experiment income 2 status is running, so it is still making it. And so this is where you can come back to what you were doing.
Yeah, and that is actually kind of important, because otherwise you're going to lose your way. And let's wait until it's created. It should appear under endpoints. We already have one, I think. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So maybe let's just show that. I mean, it's going to be slightly different, but it's going to have all the options. This is clearly, it's not as fast as I would like, but it's actually still kind of fast. So what you see is we have a couple of options, namely the details, which helps us with, oh right, that's what the endpoint is all about. But also we have a test tab and a consume tab. So let's use the consume tab first, and that shows us, basically how to connect to this endpoint and what to provide to this endpoint. And even more coolly, you'll have some code samples like in C#, Python, and R on how to approach this endpoint and what you'll need to send it, which, that's nice service, I think. And we also have the test tab, and that will allow us to actually test an endpoint. Now, as you can see, this is the same data set that we've based this on. And as you can see, if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you do need to provide the income. But again, it's not going to use it. I don't think we can leave it empty this time because it's actually a class. So let's just leave the default value in there. And it's not going to use it, so it doesn't matter. And we can actually test the endpoint. So there's a big test button. We can use it, and it's going to tell us let's say that I'm 39. I'm not, luckily. I'm white, that's true. I'm a male, so it's almost accurate. And how much money do I make?
Less than 50,000.
Oh, that sucks. Okay, well, unfortunately, the algorithm never lies. So basically, this is like a small scale use of your endpoint where you can see where it behaves as expected. Feli is now going to input some of her personal biases to make sure that if we test again, the person will make more than 50K, so that you can see that it actually works like that as well. And
Nope.
well, your biases are not strong enough. I think the work class might be a bit of a factor here. We don't know the model because we haven't studied it, but you can test around with this and see whether the algorithm and the endpoint are useful for your for whatever purpose you would like to use it for. Yeah, that's a lot of words. But it's a lot of words because it's actually like one of my favorite features. This is really, really cool that you can just not only create a model, but you can really easily turn it into something you can actually consume from within any of your apps. Great way of making your app more intelligent. I think we should end with a book recommendation, don't you think?
I always think we should end on a book recommendation.
Good! Then maybe tell me, what book would you like to recommend today?
Yeah, so I am recommending The Number Bias by Sonoblau. And it is basically about not necessarily AI, but more statistics and numbers in general. But I think if you want to do something with AI, you need to kind of know what numbers are and how you can use them. And in this book, Sanne shows a lot of different numbers, but also how can numbers be used to make someone think something else. And she's you normally think, oh, numbers are the truth and numbers are facts. And that is true, but you can also use numbers to lie. And there's a lot of bias that comes with numbers, and you can use numbers to mislead people.
Especially because people assume that numbers are true. It's really easy. So interestingly, good recommendation, and also a good point to end for now. So hope you've learned a lot, and see you again soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.